public service feature, WSM takes pleasure this evening in bringing to you the address of the principal speaker at the convention banquet of the National Federation of the Blind. It is the presidential address to the 12th annual convention of the National Federation and will be delivered by Dr. Jacobus Tenbroek, the National Federation's president. Gathered here in the ballroom of the Andrew Jackson Hotel in Nashville are some 200 blind delegates and their friends. They are the elected representatives and spokesmen of the various state organizations of the blind. They've come to Nashville in 1952 from every part of the nation to continue their efforts to find ways and means of assuring increasing numbers of blind men and women opportunity to lead normal, useful lives. Among the honored guests on the platform are Governor Gordon Browning of Tennessee and members of his official cabinet, and Congressman J. Percy Priest. Governor Browning will introduce Dr. Tenbroek to the audience, but the first voice you hear will be that of Mr. Kenneth Jernigan, President of the Tennessee Association of the Blind, host organization for the convention, who will present Governor Browning to the assemblage. Mr. Jernigan.
It gives me great pleasure to present to you His Excellency, the Governor of Tennessee, the Honorable Gordon Browning.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, as the governor of this state, I am indeed happy to welcome you to our midst for your national convention. No group could have been more welcome than you are. In fact, if the local group that's entertaining you do not give you everything that you want, you let us know and we'll finish it out. And when we say that in Tennessee, we mean it. And we are a good bit like the colonel of a New York regiment I heard of once in the First World War, who took such a pride in his regiment that he formed them and marched them to church on Sunday morning. And the preacher on one occasion told him about being with a Massachusetts regiment the Sunday before, and said at the close of the service, 10 men came forward for baptism. On the close of the service, the colonel got up and called for his sergeant major and said, "Sergeant, detail 10 men for baptism." Says, as long as I'm in command of this regiment, no blame Massachusetts outfit's going to exceed us for piety. We're happy to welcome you because of the great purposes for which your organization stands. We here in Tennessee believe in the kind of Americanism that you are practicing when you advocate that everybody be permitted to stand on his own feet and fight his own battles and carry out his own hopes and his own ideals and his own aspirations. And when we see you do that, with whatever handicap you may have, it makes the rest of us ashamed that you're so far superior to us in many other ways that we overlook in ourselves. So I'm grateful for your presence here and for the privilege of greeting you on this occasion in the name of our state, who wants you to enjoy yourself in our midst. I know some of you come from pretty far north. I want to say to you that down here, the moon shines just as warm as the sun shines in many of your states. I'll tell you that. Now it is my happy privilege to present to you the president of your national organization. He is a leader worthy of the great cause he represents. He's a magnificent American that has made his way to the top and has held some of the most important positions of any instructor in the nation. Now I understand he is a professor of law at the University of California. and that he has written several books touching on the Constitution of the United States. And I wish that everybody would read more about that Constitution and stand more on it than they are this day and time. And he may be in position, he is in position to know whereof he speaks when he talks about the fundamentals of our government as well as the fundamentals of life. So, with great pride and with the privilege of welcoming you, I say again, I present to you now the greatest of the great who leads your great organization, Dr. Jacobus Tenbroek, who will now address you.
Mr. Jernigan, Governor Browning, delegates, members, and friends. This gathering of the blind people of the nation is an important expression of the faith that blind people place in their own organization as a matter of preserving and advancing the gains which have been made in their social and economic status. In the improvement of the welfare of the blind and in solving the problems of blindness, self-organization by the blind is an effectuating instrumentality for which neither governmental agencies nor private organizations for the blind are or can be a substitute. Only the blind themselves can be fully aware of their own problems. Only the blind themselves can feel an unremitting motivation to secure their rights and further their welfare. The right to participate fully in the community as equal partners is denied if the blind permit others to speak for them and to plan for them. This merely perpetuates dependency under the guise of improvement. Social solutions to the problems of blindness are delayed by the concept that the blind are equal to the sum of the individual cases in an agency load, whether public or private. They are expedited by the emergence of the blind from the status of isolated and unorganized beneficiaries into a conscious group able to pool experiences, contribute to each other's psychological and social growth, reach conclusions, invent solutions, and demand action on employment discrimination, income security, and other vital issues. The organization of the blind is, in fact, the indispensable condition for real progress from dependent ward to independent citizen. Organization of the blind is an example of the democratic process in sharp contrast to the traditional part assigned to the blind in, or more accurately, out of community life. It is thus no accident that in the 12 years since the National Federation of the Blind was founded, significant gains have been made in the public assistance field, in vocational rehabilitation, and in other social services which improve the economic lot and cultural integration of the blind. The principles on which the National Federation of the Blind is founded reflect a positive determination to finish the process that has been begun and to effect a complete transformation of the social role of the blind from helpless, pauperized, and segregated wards held in social custody to full and equal members in society as first-class citizens. If I may be permitted to repeat some words you have heard me use before, perhaps the first goal on our list is the goal of understanding, which, in negative terms, means nothing less than the total eradication of the ancient stereotype of the helpless blind man, that age-old equation of disability with inability, which remains today as ever the real affliction of blindness. Second, and closely dependent upon the first, is the assertion of our normality, the elementary truth that the blind are ordinary people, and more exactly, that they are persons, unique individuals, each with his own particular as well as his general human needs. Third among our objectives is security, representing a normal human striving which is only accentuated, not transformed, by the fact of blindness, and to which the programs of public assistance are especially addressed. But security remains a static and even a stultifying concept without the further element of opportunity, which is the fourth of our objectives: opportunity to participate and to develop, to become useful and productive citizens. Fifth in line, but not in importance, is the goal of equality, which is both a precedent and a product of all the rest. Equality which flows from the sense of belonging, from the frank acceptance of the community, and which entails equal treatment under the law, equal opportunity to employment, and equal rights within society. Sixth is the objective of education. Education of the blind in terms of social adjustment and vocational rehabilitation, and education of the sighted, parents, teachers, employers, and the community, in terms of the several goals already mentioned. Seventh and last is the platform of adequate legislation, permanent safeguards based on rational and systematic evaluation of our needs and erasing once and for all the restrictive barriers of legal discrimination and institutionalized ignorance. These are general goals, broadly stated. I shall attempt to spell out with you this evening their application, present significance, and future prospects in three main areas of vital importance to the blind: employment, public assistance, and rehabilitation. First, employment. There are today in this country several thousand blind men and women who have achieved success in regular employment and normal economic pursuits. They occupy a great variety of positions and perform with efficiency, side by side with their sighted fellows, almost all the tasks of everyday employment. Think of any occupation. The great likelihood is that somewhere in the country a blind man or woman is succeeding at it on a competitive basis. There are among us teachers and scholars, day laborers and factory workers, physicians and scientists, housewives and mothers, businessmen and bankers, bakers, bench workers, traders and manufacturers, mechanics and machine tool operators, attorneys, judges, politicians, secretaries, stenographers, switchboard operators, farmers of every description. We count among our ranks those who spend their days performing repetitive tasks as turning nuts on bolts on the assembly line, and those who engage in research in the physical and social sciences. Unskilled workers and skilled technicians according to their varying tastes, training, capacities, and abilities. But all of the foregoing, and the list is by no means exhaustive, are singular, not to say isolated instances of individual achievement. They are not typical or representative of employment conditions among the blind. Despite what they show about adaptability and capacities of the blind, for every blind man who has thus succeeded over the extraordinary obstacles in his path, there are many of whom the obstacles have been raised too high and who are cast by the wayside of life to wither in frustration and want, defeat and insecurity. Why is this? The answer is to be found in the answers to a number of simple questions. Are you an employer? How many blind people have you employed or given a chance to prove their ability? Are you a civil service commissioner? How many positions have you thrown open to blind persons able to pass the examination and do the work? Are you a state rehabilitation officer? How many blind people have you placed in agriculture, industry, commerce, or the profession? Are you a welfare worker? How is your system adapted to getting the blind off relief and into self-support? The answers to these questions in most cases must be a resounding negative, and the reason in each case is not physical but psychological. The uncritical, or more accurately, the unthoughtful acceptance of the pervasive assumption of the total incapacity of the blind, the lingering image in the mind of the public generally and of employers of the helpless blind man. Acting on this assumption and in the presence of this image, the private employer sympathetically but automatically turns away the blind job seeker. The government and governing boards of professions, trades, and common callings, by statute, regulation, and formal requirement, erect automatic but utterly irrational and irrelevant barriers against the blind. Public and private employers may rationalize their refusal to hire the blind on the grounds that the blind are less efficient, more prone to accident, more inclined to be absent, more likely to quit, and represent greater insurance risks than able-bodied workers. But a convincing array of surveys taken by the government itself, together with the experience during the war with blind workers, who were usually the last to be hired and the first to be fired, has established beyond dispute that these charges are groundless. On the contrary, the record shows that when blind workers are properly placed, they perform at least as well as their sighted colleagues, and in many cases, better. We do not ask that the blind be given jobs because they are blind. We do not ask that they be given preferential treatment or handicap allowances. We ask only that when a blind man has the training, the qualifications, the dependability, and the aptitude, he be given an equal chance with his sighted fellows. that the bars to public and private employment interposed by legislative enactment, administrative whim, and managerial prejudice and misunderstanding be removed, that he be given access to the main channels of social and economic activity and permitted both to enjoy the benefits of society and to contribute to its work and progress. The American people have always believed in the virtues of work and condemned idleness as a plague. From this strongly rooted attitude have emerged both the gospel of self-help, of laissez-faire, and more recently, the right to work, the social obligation of full employment. What can be said of a system which forbids a whole class the possibility of self-help and the right to work, except that if it is not inhuman, it is surely un-American? When we turn to the welfare system, the same pervasive assumption of helplessness and incompetence of the blind underlies and qualifies the program and therefore the future prospects of the blind. Destitution is a poor basis for the difficult task of economic and psychological readjustment of the blind. Yet destitution is made a condition of eligibility for public assistance. Economic encouragement by way of an improved standard of living, retention of reasonable amounts of resources, accumulation of some capital and income are necessary to translate a theoretical social interest in rehabilitation into terms which have meaning and value to the individual. The blind man who is on public assistance is denied all of these or permitted them in sharply curtailed and wholly inadequate form. Poverty begets only poverty, stultifies the personality, and stifles ambition. Yet gross material inadequacy is the rule the nation over, under a standard of relief which has fallen far below the cost of living and left the blind ill-fed, ill-clothed, and ill-housed. The means test, glorified into a welfare principle in the expression individual need individually determined, has been integrally associated with the precarious maintenance of the recipient at the barest level of minimum survival. For the many thousands of blind who might eventually be restored to self-support, it is indispensable that psychological independence be strengthened, even while they are temporarily economically dependent. Yet this is impossible if, as the means test requires, their scanty finances are under continuing review, their meager consumption expenditures are scrutinized and judged, and they are treated as chattels in custody without rights or powers of self-government rather than as first-class citizens. Under the welfare system as it exists today, the blind man is treated as a congenital indigent who must be firmly guided through the most routine and intimate details of his private life by the insistent hand of the social worker. He is soon aware of the inferior position into which he has been thrust. He comes to understand that he is the victim of unique discrimination, that other groups in society, labor, farmers, and industrialists, make no such sacrifice in personal liberty in receiving a helping hand from government. And with this deepening realization, his resentment is compounded, his frustration, insecurity, and hostility intensified, his alienation from self and society complete. He has been robbed of self-respect and the right to resume a useful role in society. For freedom in the direction of one's personal life is a fundamental democratic right, but it is also more than that. It is a basic human need. The individual who is not permitted to fulfill that need is sharply cut off from the rest of society, and, in the case of the blind aid recipient, he becomes the captive of a system which was designed to set him free. As long as the unrealistic concept of need, that archaic residue of the medieval poor laws, is retained, the country of the blind must bear upon its portals the inscription, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." As long as the exemptions of property and income, particularly earned income, are kept at their present meager and inadequate levels, the blind applicant for aid is told, in effect, if you wish to get on the dole, you must promise not to try to get off. We are willing to help you in distress, but not out of it. As long as the public assistance laws are not geared to rehabilitation, employment, and self-support, the blind are effectively prevented from pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, from working their way forward in the traditional American way out of charity and subservience into independence and self-respect. as long as the welfare system continues to reflect the shackling assumption of the incompetence and helplessness of the blind, there is written into our law and into the future of the blind those dictionary definitions which suggest that to be blind is to be lacking not so much in eyesight as in foresight and insight, in mental vision and intellectual perception. In the fundamental reform which is ultimately necessary, public aid for the employable blind must represent not a handout to the helpless, but an encouragement to self-help, not a permanent charity which perpetuates dependence, but an immediate incentive which invites independence. Here in the state of Tennessee, much remains to be done in the field of public assistance which can be done without a federal negative. The harmful effects of the means test can be curtailed by assuring all blind aid recipients a fixed minimum of income after the manner of the California plan. The blind can be brought to a decent standard of living and a decent basis for rehabilitation and eventual self-support by a considerable increase in their budgeted allowances without a serious strain on the public treasury or one to which many people, be they politicians or taxpayers, would object. Eligibility requirements should be drastically relaxed. A personal property exemption of at least $1,500, the amount permitted by the federal government, and the minimum amount required to aid blind people in moving from relief to independence by way of small businesses or the professions, should be the rule as a matter of legal right, and real property exemptions should be of such a character as to permit all blind men and women to receive aid without being driven from their homes. Enforcement of legal liability of responsible relatives, so unjust to the aging parents of blind persons, so destructive of family ties, natural sympathies, and the independence of the blind person, should be abolished. A program of financial assistance to the partially self-supporting blind with the incentive exemption of sizable amounts of income, especially earned income, should be undertaken by the state without expectation of federal participation. Such a program now exists in 4 states, where it adds continually to the number of blind persons who are entirely free of state subvention. One might suppose, from the great need for constructive improvement in the public assistance laws, that the prospects of the blind who are aid recipients are there at their lowest. The road from there must surely lead upward, for beyond public assistance lies rehabilitation, consisting of case finding, counseling, guidance, training, and placement in remunerative jobs. Such, however, is not the case. Truly, it would seem that the welfare of the blind as embodied in these programs is upon an unbroken plateau that stretches as far as the eye can see and is at a low elevation. All too frequently, the rehabilitation officers share and act upon the general public prejudices which typically expressed in rejection and overprotection, rejection of the mainstream of competition and overprotection in sheltered eddies of employment. The process begins with a congenital infirmity. The typical case, the newly blinded person is not found by the rehabilitation agency for 7 years, 7 long years of disintegrating idleness and maladjustment, 7 lean years of debilitating social worker surveillance. Once he is found, he is counseled to learn to accept his handicap with equanimity and composure, guided with a firm hand and financial controls into a limited range of stereotyped and near-stereotyped occupations, trained to perform them with the help of inadequate funds and inexpert teachers, and finally, more likely than not, placed in a sheltered workshop as the answer to his need for normal employment outlet. With little opportunity for advancement or the usual rewards of productive labor, forbidden the incentives to apply his initiative and resources, engulfed in an atmosphere of defeatism, he will live out his economic life in virtual bondage as a ward of the state or as a ward of private charity. His rejection from the mainstream of community life is thus irrevocable and complete. The modern view of public assistance for the blind as essentially reintegrative depends in some measure, for its success, of course, upon the simultaneous victory of this philosophy within the field of vocational rehabilitation. What is needed is a profound revision of the whole rehabilitation process, based on the principle that the blind are normal human beings with a diversified occupational potential, possessed of the right and the capacity to do a full job in our economy. This requires prompt methods of case finding to rescue the newly blinded from apathy and isolation, It demands a new emphasis in counseling, guidance, and training marked by full faith in the abilities of the blind, boldness, imagination, and optimism in stimulating effort and ambition, and above all, a supportive rather than a controlling role in career selection. It is never the function of the rehabilitation officer to say what cannot be done. It is only his function to aid the blind client in doing what may seem to him impossible. Would the client be a farmer, a lawyer? Would he be an atomic scientist or a beekeeper? Would he be a street sweeper or an electrical engineer? There are obstacles enough in his path without having the rehabilitation officer add to them. The rights of the blind, which are put at stake and derogated in these three broad areas of employment, public assistance, and rehabilitation, are so basic as to be indispensable equally to personality, membership in society, and democracy. Excessive social worker interference in the lives of blind welfare clients, petty and harassing investigations and surveillance, the perpetuation of dependency, these constitute a flagrant invasion of the right of liberty. A welfare system which entails these things for the blind while exacting no such sacrifice from other aided groups deprives these citizens of the right to equal treatment and equal protection of the laws. Inadequate welfare payments far below the accepted level of existence deny the blind their right to security. And finally, the persistent refusal of both government and business to employ blind workers and of the welfare system to provide an incentive to advancement. The exclusion of the blind from the main social and economic activities of the community is a clear violation of their right to opportunity. The nation's blind, in brief, are the victims of a double standard. On the one hand, they are seduced by the promise of independence and self-sufficiency emblazoned on the standards of democratic freedoms. On the other hand, they are trampled under by the four horsemen of pity, insecurity, overprotection, and rejection.
As a public service feature, WSM has just brought you the presidential address to the 12th Annual Convention of the National Federation of the Blind. The speaker was Dr. Jacobus Tenbroek of Berkeley, California, the National Federation's president. His speech was delivered to the conventional banquet in the ballroom of the Andrew Jackson Hotel here in Nashville. Dr. Tenbroek was introduced by His Excellency, the Right Honorable Governor Gordon Browning of Tennessee. This is the Air Castle of the South.
2 convention recordings will be found as this series continues now on the opposite edge of the tape.